All right, let's get going. So welcome everybody and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be presenting Agile Leadership Applied by Nancy Wright. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded. We will post a link to the recording and the slide deck on the webinar page of the website as soon as it's available. I will also be posting the link to where you can find the recording later on at the end of the webinar as well. To ensure a high quality recording, all attendees are encouraged to mute your mic. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I will either address them during the presentation, or if we have time for questions at the end, we'll do that as well. Finally, I'll just take a minute here to introduce Miss Nancy Wright. Nancy's services focus on Agile-based project, program portfolio, and strategic management and the related organizational change adoption techniques. She provides on-site and remote Agile training and coaching directly for client teams, management, and leadership in both the public and private sectors, as well as through training organizations. Nancy is passionate about training and coaching the Agile mindset and Scrum Kanban frameworks, and addresses the organizational changes needed to support successful adoption and implementation. Her practical experience has been developed through enterprise-wide business IT projects and enhanced through coaching contracts, certifications, and credentials. She trains with an instructional style that includes hands-on activity, coaches to help teams self-assess for improvement, and partners with leadership to recommend organizational investment opportunities to advance the integration of Agile techniques. Now, without further ado, Nancy, take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. I'm going to have to work with you to shorten that a little bit. All right, so thank you everyone for joining. I am here today to present a webinar on the topic of Agile Leadership Applied. It is a promo webinar, which means we're just going to touch on the highlights of some of the information. And I'd like to encourage you that if you want to learn more about the topic, that you would join me on June 14th. There's a 4-hour workshop where we'll take the same topics and dive into them a little bit deeper, including some activities and things that you could use to process the information for incorporation into your organization. With that said, today, the key takeaway that I want you to understand is whether you are new to Agile, bringing it into your organization, you already have brought it in, or still just considering it, Agile is all about change. And so what I want to help today, this course, the Agile Leadership Applied, is geared mostly towards leaders and managers, but could also be provided to teams. So anybody who's in the Agile space is welcome to join the course. But when we talk about change, we have to understand how we individually handle change and then how we can help others change. So that is what I'm talking about, applying Agile leadership. That's the framework that I'm coming from for this. So while Marissa did a wonderful job of providing my background to you, I wanted to just give you another bit of information about why I think I'm qualified to help you with this topic. I've been in the project management world since 1991 and learned waterfall project management, what we call traditional project management. So I came up through the ranks, project manager, program manager, learned to run portfolios, helped develop a project management office, a PMO. So was very entrenched in the traditional project management space. And along the way, in the 2000s, I was given the opportunity to learn another way to manage projects, which is the Agile and Scrum framework that I'm talking about today. So I added then Scrum Master, Product Owner, other certifications that allowed me to expand those skills based on the experience I had. And then near the end of my private employment, I wanted to become a trainer and a consultant so that I could help others and coach others through the adoption of Agile. So today I've added leadership courses, Agile coaching certifications, team facilitation certifications, other topics that can allow me then to provide a broader range of experience. And I have been working in the private and public industries, but public sector for the last 8 years, I've been training and coaching state organizations on how to adopt Agile in one form or another, because there are many ways that you can bring it into your organization. So today's topics then, we will cover the Agile mindset, what that means as far as bringing the value of Agile adoption into your organization, the Agile approach and Scrum, highlight the Scrum framework, some of the cultural changes that you need to consider when you're bringing Agile into your organization, and then if you're choosing to adopt and adapt to those changes, what your next steps might be. So let me start with the Agile mindset. When I talk about a mindset or an Agile mindset specifically, I'm asking you to think differently. You may all be very knowledgeable with your project management expertise from a traditional viewpoint, but when we bring Agile into the organization into play, then we need to think about how we are approaching everything in a different way. So this next picture here, if you want to come off of mute, please feel free. But when you look at this picture, what do you see?
Maybe an elderly couple, a cup. That's it for me.
Okay, I heard elderly couple.
First thing we see, or what all we see?
Music. Somebody's playing guitar and somebody's having hands up on the head, listening.
Yes, and I'm seeing responses in the chat too. Oh, here's a good one. Creepy lady in the door. So there are many aspects to this photo and there are no wrong answers. As a couple of you are saying, there's quite a few things you can see in here. Oftentimes, the thing that people see the first is the elderly couple, the profiles of the elderly couple who are looking towards each other. Then if you sort of look into the center of the photograph, you could see sometimes what people call the chalice or the golden goblet, right? It's the brighter yellow item that's there. And then if you start to look at kind of a little bit different scale, you might see the people, there's a gentleman playing the guitar, he's looking towards a woman who might have some pottery sitting on her head. There is a woman in the background coming through the door. So really the mindset and how you look at this picture, all of you looked at the same picture, but something jumped out at you first, and it's how you processed what you were seeing. So how about this next one? What do you see in this one?
I see a woman laying down half in water.
Okay. So some people are noticing the rocks, right? Like stones, probably a lake because you can see the reflection of the stones, and more of a landscape. Some of you are seeing, if you sort of tip your head to the side, you're seeing a woman's face, and it looks like a small child is kind of sitting in her lap. So maybe at chest level, you can see the child's face and the woman's face. So again, and I'm getting some other great responses there. Again, you all looked at the same picture, and it's really just sort of what jumped out at you first. As I'm explaining the other options for what you could see, then probably there are some people who are saying, okay, now I can see that, but I didn't see that at first. So when I talk about a mindset, this is really the emphasis that I make with people. Is a mindset is your way of thinking, how you are inclined based on all of the habits and beliefs that you have. Everything influences how you think, what you feel, and what you do. So when I come into an organization, have the opportunity to train people, coach people, then I'm asking you all to open your minds to other ways of doing the work that could be very different from what you're used to doing. So we spend more time diving into that in the workshop. The other topic then, and the second topic, is to talk about an Agile approach and the Scrum basics. This is often, I provide a 2-day class. When I go really into detail, this can take up to 2 days with practice and all of the activities that we include. But at a very high level, the Agile approach asks you to incorporate new roles into your organization. There's a product owner who functions in what we are generally used to as the sponsored customer space. There's a Scrum Master who's often equated with a project manager, but they are 2 different roles. And then the delivery team, which is the team members who are providing the information and delivering the project. So we go into more detail about the roles and how you need to bring those into the organization and change sometimes how people collaborate and work together. We also have very many events. Scrum is comprised of many events. They're there in the green font. We have backlog refinement and product backlog development. And then we have sprints and sprint planning and daily stand-ups or daily scrums. You might have heard of those. Sprint reviews with our customers, sprint retrospectives with our teams. All of these events could be very new to your organization. So I spend time helping leaders understand what that means to bring this approach into your organization and how you as leaders may need to react differently and support differently. And then the artifacts that come out of Agile, the vision, the roadmap, the product backlog, both the overall for the scope and also the sprint backlogs for each sprint. Those two are very different. How we approach Agile for project management is a very different way, and the practices are different than what you and your organization might be used to. So I spend time then explaining what those are and how you as leaders, again, can incorporate that thought process and be supportive. Because remember, we're talking about how you change as a leader of the organization and also how you're going to help others change as they are trying to learn new things. So in a nutshell, then, the approach is to think about how we're organizing our teams, how we are working with our customers, and how we are delivering the product for our customers. And we use something called the Scrum framework. And we introduce sprints, sprint cadences. We organize the teams differently. We have these kind of bookend events that we do so that the teams are focused on iteratively delivering the product. And that's very, very different from traditional project management. So again, if your organization is already entrenched in that waterfall thought process, then introducing an Agile approach with the Scrum framework is going to be a very different opportunity for you. And so we have sprint planning as an example. The teams get together just to plan the particular sprint length. 2 weeks is pretty common, but 2 weeks, let's say, for a sprint, we plan the work just for that sprint. We work on it through an iterative method. And then at the end, we have a sprint review where we invite the customers in and ask for their feedback and keep them involved throughout the entire process. That can be very different from a traditional approach where you sometimes have your customers involved at the beginning to help you with your requirements and all of that, but we don't always have them involved throughout giving us feedback and offering up feedback loops like we do with the sprint review in our Scrum framework. Another event that we do within the Scrum space is a sprint retrospective. So we're asking then the team to get together and reflect on how their sprint went so that we can inspect and adapt. We can learn from what we just did, build our relationships and our dynamics. And all of these roles that I mentioned, the product owner and the Scrum Master and then the delivery team, everyone has very specific aspects that they bring to these new processes and these new events. So as leaders, I want to help you understand what that means and again, how you can support that when you have Agile coming into your organization. So we spend a lot of time talking about the Scrum framework to make sure you understand what all these terms mean, what the roles mean, and how, again, you as leaders might need to shift some of your thinking to be the most supportive for what's coming into your organization. So that leads me then to
Are you there?
the cultural changes within the organization. There is a document called the Agile Manifesto. It was written in the early 2000s and lays out 4 Agile values and 12 Agile principles. And so I spend time with the leaders having them understand what it means to incorporate those Agile values into your culture. We talk a lot within Agile about focusing on the individuals and the interactions, not so much just on the processes and the documentation. We focus on customer collaboration, as I mentioned, bringing our customers into that space with us on a frequent basis so that we can continue to make sure we're working on the highest priorities for the customers and improving the product for them. And then we have a couple of activities where we try to deeper dive into the Agile principles and what it means to reset the environment within the culture of your organization so that you are allowing the teams the opportunity to succeed. So there are some tips and tricks that I provide to the leaders when they come to get the more detailed version. So that leads us to then, if we approach Agile, and Scrum being the most popular method of Agile, if we approach an Agile project management sort of mindset and bring the actual implementation of the practices and the events and all that into the organization, it won't just be enough. You can't just teach the teams how to do the work. We need to be able to add a lot of the sort of the wraparound activities, all of the upfront ways that we involve our customers for planning. We need to have different ways that we build trust and collaboration through some of these events and through some of the methods that I am able to teach. So it's a package deal. You can bring all the practices in and teach people the day-to-day how to do it, but it is truly a mindset shift for the organization as well as the teams. And it's important for leaders of the organization, again, to be able to have that upfront awareness, let's say, so that you can then help the teams to be successful. You can't just sort of watch from above and expect it to work. It's a multi-level involvement. So one thing that I do want to leave you with is, I mentioned Agile is not just about coming in and training the teams. It can definitely influence how you do your projects within the state, especially at all levels. If you're used to using the project approval lifecycle, the PAL process with CDT, there are changes to that process. I did have the experience of working with the Department of Healthcare Services on a multi-year systems modernization project. And the decision was made years ago to adopt an Agile approach. And if any of you have worked with the PAL process with CDT, that is very waterfall based, and you have to do everything according to, you know, all of the steps they lay out. So it was an interesting challenge. It was really fun, actually, for me to be able to work with the state organization I was consulting with and CDT to figure out how could we still follow the PAL process, but be providing the Agile documents and the items and practices that will make Agile successful. So, you know, the PAL process, you have to think about how you procure and how you contract. That might be done differently if you are hiring, say, from the Agile vendor pool, different approaches there. Over time, there have been considerations for different ways to do budgeting and tracking of project costs, because in the state, we know the cycle is sometimes, you know, a couple years ahead for budgeting. So there are changes sometimes within that space. Supporting the organizational cultural changes that I already mentioned, learning how to collaborate with the CDT office, with executives, with other leadership across other divisions who may not be familiar with an Agile approach if you're working with other departments or divisions. So learning how to collaborate on work projects, work products, so that you can incorporate the strengths of Agile. And then there always is the opportunity to scale Agile. You can offer it at a single team, just a couple of teams, or you can get into a larger, like I said, this modernization project. We had multiple teams. We had all the people in the roles, but there were up to 6 different development teams that all had to coordinate their work together so that we could march the work down, you know, the line. So there's a lot of other topics to consider. And CDT does have some basic Agile documents out on their website. I don't think that they've expanded on them lately. They are still in the process of being documented, the last I checked. So the last step then is when you're thinking about adopting and adapting to the change, you know, what as leaders do you all need to be able to really consider? And to recap then, understanding that Agile mindset, that I am not here to knock traditional or waterfall project management. There are many times when that is still the best way to deliver a project. But Agile has its place, and there are certain projects, whether they are large ones or small ones, where you can bring that in. So you need to understand that whole Agile mindset, learn the different roles and practices and events, be supportive for creating those cultural changes that you need to do within your organization. As leaders, be willing to listen to your teams. They're going to be learning a lot of new ways of thinking, and you as leaders need to be able to listen to them and help coach them through that so you can support their learning process. And most importantly, be willing to be a change agent so that you are championing what you are asking your teams to do, and they know that they have your support. So as leaders, there's a unique extra role involved. You may not be day-to-day participating on, doing the Scrum events as a Scrum team, but you should be an involved stakeholder and customer for them so that you can support what's going on. So brings me to the end of today's webinar. Again, this is a promotion just for the 4-day class. We already have it scheduled for June 14th. There is limited seating. If you would like to join us, there's Marissa mentioned that she will give information on where this webinar is, but you can also find the Agile Leadership Applied course listed under the leadership category. And also, I think it's in all audiences as well. And it's on Tuesday, June 14th for 4 hours in the morning. Happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Nancy. If you guys have any questions, just be sure to type them in the question box in the control panel here. I will read them for Nancy and she will answer.
I'm scanning also to see. Oh, somebody, Marissa, it looks like you're on mute right now, but somebody said that they can't see the seminar to register. It's not under, I just want to make sure I'm saying this totally, it's not under webinars. This is somebody who messaged me directly. It is in the training program section? Where do you have
in
that?
the training section.
Training.
I'll post it again here in the chat right now.
Okay. Oh, good. You may have. I'm just going through an order here, so.
No problem. I saw a question from Greg. He said, Nancy, have you ever come across leaders that just refuse to adapt? What are some ways to overcome that challenge?
So how many hours do you have? I have come across leaders. I have a personal experience with a state branch chief who was absolutely never, ever, ever going to adopt Agile. The person's background was always in traditional and waterfall, and it just took some time. We asked for permission to start on a very small scale, and like something that was well under the radar. Nobody was really paying attention, so that we could just show how beneficial it could be to get the customers involved. That's the biggest change, and to get business value out in front of the customers, which would be your organizational people usually, right? Your own organization. So if you have the opportunity to start small and just prove the concept, it's often at least a step in the door so that you can then say, okay, so now that we've seen this, could we try it with a team? I've also had leaders come around where a project team has been really, really excited, and they just sort of decided to do it and on a small scale. And then they got so excited that they convinced the leaders how wonderful it was. So sometimes the grassroots movement can work, going up, and sometimes it's a combination of me with the leaders, convincing them of the business value and giving it a try on something where they won't, they won't be embarrassed or see it fail or things like that. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Nancy. And then our next question comes from Marina. How can we make Agile work in our environment where resources are only part-time on a project, where there's no dedicated resources?
So the ideal situation is for resources to be as fully allocated as possible to an Agile project, but that is simply not the reality most of the time. So there are very successful ways. If your team members are just part-time allocated, then what we do is sort of scale down some of the events, or we plan accordingly. Basically, we adapt. And so if you have your people, for example, they're half-time, say, on a project, and then the other half the time, maybe they're doing production, work or things like that, right? They're the response team. Then it's pretty common for us. We just downsize the number of hours they have available. We downsize the work they try to take on in a sprint. We just work within what we have. So it's not an absolute that you have to have everybody 100% or close to 100% to make it work. We can make it work with as much time as is available.
All right, thank you. And then we have another question. Sorry, my dogs are shaking. Do you have some examples where the standard waterfall process should still be preferred over the agile method?
So yes, as a general statement, if you have done the same, I won't say the same project, but the same type of project to where you are actually going to be repeating what you've done in previous projects, then the traditional method is probably the best, because you can see the future, right? That's the benefit to repeating things. Agile is best when you really can't see the full future of the project. And so you need to learn as you go and adapt as you go. And so Agile allows us that freedom to be able to modify our priorities, modify maybe the approach that we take to deliver the project and things like that. So, you can go out and Google search different assessments and things that say, is waterfall better or is Agile better? But in a nutshell, if you can't predict the full future and scope and priorities of your project, then Agile might really benefit you because it allows you to inspect and adapt along the way.
Thanks, Nancy. And at this time, this is the last question. So last call for questions. And I'm going to post the webinar recording link. So I have to upload this, so it'll take a minute. It'll be up by this afternoon. So just be sure to check back this afternoon when the webinar will be uploaded to this link here. So there's a link. Keep that in your pocket.
Great. Thank you all so much. I hope that some of you will choose to join the 4-hour seminar where we get a chance to dive more deeply. And there's always time for very specific questions about the organization that you're in. So that's the fun part for me, is helping people figure out how they're going to adopt and adapt.
Nancy, we have one more question. We have 2 minutes. Marcus says, how does Agile leadership apply to running a CIP budget?
I don't think I know what CIP stands for.
Marcus, can you elaborate really quickly? Or you can turn on your mic if that's easier.
Oh, capital improvement budget. How does Agile leadership apply? I'm not sure I understand what your question is asking.
Sorry. Basically, the idea is that we I work at a wastewater agency, and we have an ever-changing capital improvement budget that every year we're trying to adjust which projects we're prioritizing based on how much funding we have for that year. So it's kind of curious about how an Agile leadership method would be applied to the ever-changing landscape of that.
Okay, so at a much higher level, a portfolio level, you're actually applying a wonderful Agile concept, which is annually going through and prioritizing and reprioritizing the work that's most important to your organization or to the customers. So kudos for that. That's fantastic. Then in my mind, that is an Agile leadership thought process for how you're managing your portfolio. Within then each project, if you were applying an Agile leadership thought process, you would be prioritizing the scope of each of those projects as what's the highest to the lowest. So one way possibly would be as if you were breaking those capital improvement projects into smaller efforts, some kind of a release or phased approach. You might prioritize project A's piece of scope higher than project B's piece of scope, and then the rest of project A would come later, something like that. You could, break things into, but you're already thinking with an Agile leadership mindset by prioritizing on an annual basis like that. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, we are going to wrap up. So thank you again, everyone, for your attendance. Lastly, just one more time, we're going to post a link. It's already in the chat. Just save that for later. I will upload it later this afternoon. And that's all we got for today. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.